then too was there's a journalist here in Canada who writes for the Globe and Mail, and I know him because he was stationed in the Soviet Union when I was there, and he had a column in today's Globe where he talked about the end of conservatism, and he talked about all the conservative values that or conservative policies that really have been a non-success, and how they're basically becoming discredited increasingly. And then he said this one thing that really struck me. He said conservatives, of course, have been the worst for for deficit spending and running up the debt. He said, whereas the liberals figured out long ago that the folly of deficit financing and how we had to stop running any kind of deficits and have any kind of national debt. And the point is, I mean, it's true that conservatives have not been consistent. I mean, they have preached no deficits and then run them like crazy when it was a way of providing business with advantages through lower taxes, etc. But the reality is that they did preach those ideas. I mean, the conservatives were the ones who preached the idea of no deficit, not running any debt, etc. The liberals are the ones who have become colonized by that thinking. And, I mean, you only have to be a Keynesian to know how crazy that is. I mean, thank God nobody's actually listening to it right at the moment. I mean, if we have any hope of pulling out of this incipient depression, it's because there are stimulus packages being put together, but they're all based on deficit spending. So it's just an interesting thing about how the Conservative Party and its policies may have become discredited, but in fact conservative thinking has now become so normalized that even a progressive journalist like this talks about how, we should never go back to that folly again, that folly of deficit spending. I mean, it's not folly, it's a conservative idea.
He said that in the current context we shouldn't go back to it? Yeah.
It just shows how much people are still captured by that idea that, a deficit is the worst of all possible things. Inflation is far worse than unemployment. Deficits are far worse than stimulus.
Of course, that has been the consensus for many years, so unless people have studied a bit of economic history, they would not really know. They would have, this would be, just the unquestionable wisdom about economic policy.
Yeah, and it's also been normalized through a very interesting kind of domestic kitchen table discourse, right? Where people will say, look, governments have to learn what mom and dad have always known, that, you sit down with your bills at the table and you figure out what the budget is, etc. And then that's what you have to spend. You pay your bills and you have money left to spend. And if you don't go on vacation, etc. But Jim Stanford actually pointed out that Canadian households are in bigger personal debt right now than at any time. Credit cards are maxed straight out. I mean, what mom and dad have been doing is a fiscal stimulus through private means. I mean, nobody's actually been curtailing, and thank God. His point was, if people actually lived that way, we'd be in far worse shape. It's only because the individual consumer is willing to go out into such deep hock that there's any demand left in the system at all. So keep mom and dad, let's hope they keep ordering new cards.
But that wasn't really the idea of Keynesianism.
No.
He didn't talk about individual debt and deficit. No. Quite the opposite. He wanted to avoid that, so that people would not go bankrupt. The spending has to be collective spending, not public spending. And
but if they're not willing to do it, the only way you keep demand up is by going back to mom and dad and saying, you can get another card there with like 1.9 for 6 months. Let's go on vacation. We'll work when we get back.